Welcome back to the Carp Angler Chronicles podcast. We've got an epic two-parter for you. Stephen White joins us. Stephen is a member of the BCSG. He is a big fish angler and he is a bait enthusiast of the highest order. The guy is absolutely fascinating and he's got some very, very interesting theories on how you can target big male carp, big commons, basically how you can differentiate between the carp that you want to catch and stack the odds in your favor so you actually catch them. We had a fascinating chat. Part one is very much about what he's been doing over the recent years, how he's been targeting these fish. Then we loop back around and Stephen explains how he does it with bait, how he stacks the odds in his favor, and just loads of different stuff. I mean, the audio that we recorded for this was way over 4 hours worth, and it is an absolute goldmine of information. So I really hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed recording it. Before we jump into part one of that episode, of course, this podcast is brought to you by carphuntergiveaways.co.uk. If you haven't gone and checked them out, you really need to. They're absolutely phenomenal. There's prize draws for everyone. Anything you can think of, they do a prize draw for it. And they also give money back to Phoenix heroes who help war veterans with PTSD. Super cool company, super cool guys as well. Go and check them out if you haven't done so already. Without further ado, let's lead into part one with Stephen White. Before we deep dive into the technicalities of attracting hard to catch carp, just run us through your current angling, what kind of fish you're fishing for, how often you fishing, what's your approach. Just fill us and the listeners in on the kind of angling that you do.
Basically, I'm a syndicate angler. I'm from Bolton in the northwest, which is not the best place in the country for big carp. Basically, in the northwest, anywhere generally where there's big carp, there's a couple of park lakes, but they're a bit wild. A lot of dog walkers, so I travel. I'm on my fifth season on Acton Burnell syndicate from RH Fisheries. It's an estate lake in Shropshire. When I joined in 2016, it had the general consensus was somewhere between 60 and 80 original fish, but they were big fish certainly by my standards. Possibly somewhere like 30 to 40 of them over 35 pound. At the time, there could have been 20 odd 40s, depending on, anywhere between 18 and 20 and 22 40s, say, depending on the time of year. So some would drop down to sort of 37, 38 when they were after spawning, and then they creep back up. So it was a big fish water. It was a culture shock for me because I hadn't really fished in deep silt with weed, which gives you presentation issues. Mm-hmm. The other thing is the fish are very, very, very riggy and very, very pressured fish. Basically, they fish from the spring straight through till sort of early winter. And they've been fished for since about 94 by the best anglers in the country. So the fish are sort of 30, anywhere between sort of 30, 32 years old. So they've seen it all by every angler, and they've been pressured for many, many years. But they're big fish and they eat a lot of bait. When I started, I did 5 sessions before I caught my first fish. I started off on one of my nut mixes, which is quite a visible bait, and I went up in the shallow end, and I just couldn't keep a bait in the water between the swans and the tufties. I just couldn't keep a bait in the water. So I tried various swims, and then I went in with my fish meal. But it was quite a shock. Just the conditions of the lake rather than anything else. And then on my fifth visit, I managed to snag one on my nut mix, a fish called the Atwell male. And then after that, I started catching. You do a lot of blanks on Acton because it's the nature of the beast. There's about 11 swims on the top lake, but only really 7 of them get fished to any great extent. So if a swim is hot, then it's difficult to get in that swim. If I give you an example, in September of 2016, in 9 days, Conquer Swim and African Swim were hot, and they did 740s in 9 days.
Shit.
Yeah, they just switched on, and it just went mental. Luckily, I started and had two of them, which was amazing. I had a fish called the Matt Hayes Mirror, which was, well, I found out it was the most sought after fish in the lake. And I braced that with another fish called Stumpy. I had that on my fish meal. And then after that, a lad followed me and he did his week, and he had 340s out. He had 7 fish. He had 1 fish every night when he was doing his week, and 3 of them were 40s. And then African did 440s as well. So and at the same time, the lower lake did 240s. So it was just a mad period. And then that was pretty much it till the spring. And then in the spring, I had another 6 fish down at the dam wall end. But one of them was what is now the biggest fish in the lake, called the slopehead mirror. So I finished the season on 440s. I had 15 fish, so I was quite happy at that, because it was different angling from anything I'd done before, in terms of just how pressured the fish were, just how difficult and cute they were to catch. But it was a scary time because the fish were so big. Every time you got a run, your legs just went. It was horrible. Playing the fish was horrible. You were just holding your rod saying, "Please don't fall off," and you just felt sick. The adrenaline rush off playing one of those fish. And like when I had the Matt Hayes, I had it at 3:30 in the morning. You've got to jump out of bed into your chesties, out into the water, because there's all overhanging trees. And I was playing that fish for 50 minutes, and the whole time it's just I thought I'd tail hooked it. I honestly thought it was foul hooked. It was just bouncing. It was just the perfect carping moment. As long as I live, I will never forget that fight. The sky was crystal clear. It was pitch black. And the fish really didn't go anywhere. I caught it at 40 yards. And for 50 minutes, it basically swam up and down and didn't take more than a couple of yards of line. I couldn't do anything with it. It was just like a submarine. And it never went further out than sort of an extra couple of rod lengths, and it never came further in than about 32 yards for 50 minutes. And it was just banging its head, and it was just crazy. Anyway, when I netted it, I went and got the bailiff, because the rules are you can't do self takes. So I left it in the net, went and got the bailiff who was fishing, and we weighed it, and it was 44.10. I was just blown away. You just fall apart, because it's such a beautiful fish. You've had it at like 3:30 in the morning. It's now 4:30 when you're doing the pictures, so you're knackered. And it's a mid-40 mirror. It's just a mental place. I described the first season driving down to Acton. It's a 2-hour journey for me. And you were almost having anxiety attacks getting down, because just hoping to get in a certain swim. It didn't take long to work out where the fish were, because they show a lot. I mean, in 2016, they had a bit of Argolis on, so they were nutting for fun. So you'd be sat there, and like at 70, 80 yards, you'd see a mid-40 come clean out and just go badoosh. And it was just, culturally, it was very different from fishing somewhere. Like before that, I was on Nipton Res in Leicestershire, and you'd never see a fish. And if you saw a show, it would be a slight sort of fish rolling. You would never see a fish nut out. So to see Max and nut out like that, it was just insane. But and also with it being a silty estate, like you see a lot of fizzing when the water's still. You see them really fizzing up, and over time, sort of within the first season, I fished a lot the first season, and I noticed big patches of fizzing, and they seem to be single feeding fish. And then in 2017, the second season, I didn't really fish that much. I fished in June, and then I didn't really do much in July and August. I went back in September, and I had a beautiful brace of, I had the slope head again, and a fish called the First Bay Mirror. The First Bay was 41.8, and the slope was 46.5, which was a new UK PB at the time. That was over the fish meal as well. Basically, that trip in late September, it was one of the moon phases in September, and I turned up, I put my marker out, and I put 1,500 baits over on a spot. It's the only time I've ever done 3 days there. And then for 2 days, I didn't get a bite. And I seen them fizzing on the spot, but they'd come and graze a bit and then go off, come back and graze a bit. And sort of nearly 48 hours into the trip, I had the first bite, which was the first bay mirror. That was again about 3 o'clock in the morning. And then once you have a fish like that, you can't sleep again. So I was absolutely written off that whole day because you're absolutely elated, but you're knackered, but you've got so much adrenaline going on, you can't sleep. So it's almost like being in a limbo state. And then this was a mad one. I went to bed at 8 o'clock, and at 11:30, I had one of the little spawned on commons. Apparently, about 7-8 years ago, the lake was quite weedy, and the carp spawned, and a few of the fish survived in the weed. They didn't get predated on by the perch and the pike. So you've got these little spawned on commons, which at the time they were sort of doubles. Anyway, I went to bed at 8 o'clock. By 11 o'clock, I had this double, and I'd literally probably fallen asleep for about an hour. So I was like a zombie. Honestly, I was just in a right state. Put that rod back out, and then it was about 1:30 by the time I went to sleep again. And about 2:30, I had the slope. it was just mental. And the water level was down as well. So you put the chesties on, you walk out into the lake, and the silt, your boots just sink in, and you literally, if you're playing a fish for a reasonable period, once you've netted it, you try and turn around, you literally can't move. Your boots are stuck in. So I didn't realize how big this fish was because it was really weedy in 2017. So I just sort of, with all the silt and everything, and I just netted a ball of weed, and I ended up having to stick the landing net pole into the silt, and then sort of do the same thing with rod, and then try and get my chesties to move, which was comical. And at this stage, I hadn't had any sleep for like 3 nights, and I was in a right state. And basically, you can't retain fish on there, so you've got to, like, you use something like the Witchwood net station out in the lake, so you can just leave it in the landing net. Anyway, so I bit off the line, carried my rod back to my bivvy, and then I went and got a mate from next door, a lad called Declan, and I said, I've got an original. I said, it's only a 20. Come and do, I want a pick of it because it's an original. Basically, the slope is got the biggest frame on the lake, but across the back it's quite narrow. So when I was in my sort of zombie state, I looked down and I seen this narrow back. I didn't turn it on its side, and there was all the silt sort of billowing about, and I thought, oh, it's a 20. And then went and got it, and then I lifted it. I got the waistling under it to carry it out, and I lifted it up, and I said to Declan, I said, if this isn't all weed and silt, I said, this is a 50, because it was so heavy. And anyway, we got it on the mat, and I thought, Jesus, that's big. And I was so tired, I didn't even recognize it, even though I'd had it before. Anyway, we weighed it, and it was 46.5. So that was an epic trick for 2017. And then in 2018, that's sort of when what happened 2018? Yeah, 2018 was, I made some more observations with regards to when you've been on a syndicate for a while and you fish it quite a lot, you tend to see patterns. Like a certain angler will, for instance, probably fish a hinge stiffy 90% of the time, and he'll use a throwing stick. So with possibly like a white pop up. So if you sort of log that he's catching certain fish, and someone else who fishes in a similar manner, they tend to catch certain fish, and then other fish tend to come out on different baits maybe, or whatever, you tend to see a bit of a pattern emerge. Or certain other fish, like there's a fish called the otter, which is just a mad boilie head. and it gets caught loads, but every time it gets caught, it's up in weight. Whereas a lot of other fish, they come out at a decent weight, they get caught, and then if they get caught again within a month, they're usually down a bit. So you you can try and work out a pattern. Anyway, the pattern I worked out was I seemed to be catching a lot of the big females on my fish meal, and people, the bright pop-up approach seemed to be less discriminate. Seemed to be catching various fish of different sizes, but not necessarily the bigger fish. So that's when the conclusions that I drew at the time. Basically, Acton is unusual in that it's got a lot of big male fish, as in over 40 pound. So normally when you fish at a lake, the big fish are, in my experience, the big fish are females and the males are smaller, but there's a lot of big males in there, and I wasn't catching many of them, apart from when I had the Atwell on my nut mix. And I didn't get many commons. I've got a mate who's now the bailiff at Multi, and he uses one of the big manufacturers' baits, and they're all quite bright. Now he used to catch more commons than me, and again, I think I came to the conclusion, or the males and the commons are more prone to sight feeding. It's not exclusive, because you get a lot of. I was getting a lot of my bites in the dark. Other people who were fishing sort of bright baits, as you would expect, and using a throwing stick would catch them in the day. So I sort of came to the conclusion that the big females seem to be feed preferentially on fish meals at certain times, especially when you want to catch them sort of September, October, the autumn when they're big, or obviously you want to catch them in the spring. But Acton's different, where Rob closes the water to the syndicate in mid-April, and then he does open access to get, so people can get a taste of the lake if they like it, they enjoy the waiting list. So you don't fish during May, when you would get an idea of how it fishes in the spring, right before they spawn. So 2018, I started. I had a couple of fish. I had the slope again in July, and 2018 was nuclear hot, and all the fish were coming out of a swim called African, which controls the shallows. And after mid-July, I didn't have an original out of the top lake. I was fishing my fish meals. Wasn't getting anything. You were getting sort of 31 in the shade. So you can imagine that it was super high pressure, air pressure, super high water temperature, low dissolved oxygen. So basically, my campaign ended sort of mid-July. I had a fish called I had the otter spawned out at 38.4. I had the slope at 44.2, which was a good weight for July. And then it just stopped. I couldn't buy a bite. Then come the autumn, I stayed on the top lake till about October. And then October, I said there's a fish in the lower lake. There's only 2 40s really in the lower lake, possibly 3 depending on the time of year. There's a fish called the Randall, the Randall Mirror, which is the biggest fish on the complex. So I said, right, I'm going after that. And it's strange, because I was telling people I'm going to have this fish, and I'm not like that normally, but I had this massive, strong feeling that I was going to have this fish, and I'm not superstitious. I'm a scientist by education and inclination. I'm not any more superstitious than other carpers. And I thought, I'm having this fish. Anyway, the game plan was, there's a swim called First Road on the lower, and come the late autumn, people weren't fishing it because they were fishing the other side where it was easier access. And the other thing was, the back of your bivvy, the big winds, the big southerlies you get, which is when I wanted to fish, you could leave your door open because it was coming on the back of you. So I went in that swim, and I started in roughly around the 1st of October. And first trip I had the oldest fish on Acton, which is a fish called the laney, at 30 pounds 8. Had a couple of stockies a couple of weeks later. I went down for my birthday on the 9th of November, and the conditions were perfect. There was a good moon phase. The conditions were absolutely perfect. It was something like 17 degrees in November. And I thought, I'm having this fish. I'm having it on my birthday. I thought, how perfect would that be? Anyway, long story short, I hooked a little common. It swam into the margin trees, and it came off. So I went home on a blank. And then just before I left on that trip, I had we used to be able to do a full week on there because Rob closed it for open access. Then you could book a full week on, and book the week for September. So I made a big bucket of, well, 2 buckets. I made a barrel of maize and left it in something like July, and left it to ferment till September. And I wanted to do something different in terms of a feeding response. So I thought, I'm going to hit it with a big hit of bait. So I made a bucket of chickpeas, maples, and roast cocoa beans. And the reason for the roast cocoa is they're like a kidney shake. So I thought they'd sit well on the silt. And I soaked it with all sorts of stuff. I put CPS P90 pre-digested in. I put liver powder. I put a load of nampla. Put all sorts in, and then left it to fester. Boiled it, cooked it, and the usual. Left it to fester. Anyway, the long and the short of it, in the week in 2018 in September, it fished terribly. I didn't get my first choice of swim because my mate Lee bagged the go-in swim, and he ended up blanking for a full week, and he is one of the best anglers on there. So he was getting done over by the tufties. The fish were just moody. On the final weekend, every swim was taken on both lakes. Everybody turned up thinking September, we're going to kill it. And I ended up catching one of the spawn non-commons and a little stocky. So yeah, it was terrible. But anyway, on my birthday, before I left, I went on I'd been seeing fish, little fish, nutting under the trees on the dam wall. And because I hadn't caught, well, I had one fish and lost it. I thought I'll stick one down on the dam wall. So I had a real good mark about before I left. I found a spot which felt decent, but it wasn't too close to the tree line because you get a lot of fallen branches and what have you. So I was thinking about presentation. Anyway, so I went round the dam wall and I put a good 15, 20 litres of this mix in. And then I came back 5 days later, and it was still reasonable conditions, but not as good. And I set up in the same swim, cast out within a couple of hours. I had a 20-pound stocky, and it was just going dark. It was about sort of 4:30, and it was just going dark, and I was rushing to get it out. I didn't check. I have 3 Spirit 12-footers, and the tip ring it's prone to frapping up if you don't check it. And because I was rushing, I cast out and I cracked off. I haven't done that for years, and I ended up, and it was just going dark as I was doing it. And also, I fish soft braid as a hook link, so you have to see it in flight. So I just put the rod down, just head in the hand, and just put the rod down and left it. And then about half an hour, 45 minutes, I had a word with myself, tackled it up, spliced a lead, got everything set up. And you sort of, you put your rods out in the water because first rod, it's really shallow close in. So you either fish around a corner and put a bank stick in, which I don't like because I don't want the line sort of chafing on it. Or I actually put my rods out in the water. So I cast out. It was a 15 wraps. There was a big wind, like 15 wraps, but it's not a big cast. But with soft braid, it has to hit the clip perfectly. Too hard and it wraps around. And if you hit the clip too soft, then you're just going to get a tangle. So it has to go in perfect. And in this big wind in the dark with my head torch on, and I'm not kidding, it must have hit the clip about a foot above the water. And I am not good at casting. I am crap at casting. And it was just perfect. And I went down, I got a beautiful drop. I thought, oh, sweet. Sunk the line, put the rod on the steps, then on the rest. And then I basically, with my bait, it's because it's quite soluble, it's difficult to roll round. So I'll go into this with you in a bit.
Yeah.
But basically, I spom boilies out. So I was using a MIDI spom, and again because there was a crosswind, if you hit the clip too high, then it flies at an angle, and you're nowhere near your spot. And my old sort of baiting regime is to bait tight. Anyway, put 6 spoms in about 80 boilies, and every spom landed absolutely perfectly. Just right on like on a dinner plate, which never happens normally. But I was, oh yeah, fair enough, that's a touch. So I went to bed, and about 10-1, I got a run. So you jump in, the chest is out in the water, still half asleep. As soon as I pick it up, my middle rod starts ripping off. And basically what had happened is the fish had kited and took out my middle rod. But this is the weird thing. What had happened is the lead had actually come off the clip on the take. There was some dead weed around the swivel. So the lead had acted as a running rig attached to the line, come right up. So this fish is shot off, then it's kited to the left. The lead's still at sort of, well, it was at 15 wraps. It's now took out my middle rod at 10 wraps. And I've got all this horrible grating. And I just couldn't do anything with it because my middle rod was fishing on a mussel bed. And and they're all tangled up. And I put the rod with the fish on, I put it down. And then the middle rod, I had to hand line it, just drag it in. And then when that came up, the hook of the middle rod was over the line with the fish on, and the hook was at this stage round the lead, which hadn't come off on the take. So I sorted that out, chuck the middle rod back down, fully expecting the fish to be off. Pick the fish with the rod the rod with the fish on, which was the right hander, wound down onto it. The fish is still on, and then I felt the fish and thought, I know which fish this is. Or I had a good idea. Anyway, so I played it for a while, and then I netted it, and I looked down, and it was a Randall at 48.5. So yeah, that was. So it took me 7 days, 7 nights to catch that. So that was just the absolute pinnacle of my UK angling, really. Because I kept saying I was having it, but I had a really strong feeling of having it, but the difference between saying it and actually catching it is I was just so high. I phoned my mate Lee up like 1 a.m. He said, "What?" He thought I was being attacked. I was like, "Ah!" Because there was no one to, and then I had to get a selfie. And when I turned up on, this was like 16th of November, I'd seen a car in the car park from the top lake, and I didn't recognise the car because you generally know most of the members. So I walked before I set up. I walked up on the top lake, a couple of swims up on the hillside. Couldn't see whoever it was, so I thought, well, he's in the bays, which is the middle bit, because I could see the top end of the lake, and I was in the bottom end. So at 1:30 a.m, I then went tramping up the top lake to drag this poor angler down to do the pictures because you can't do selfies. So yeah, I dragged someone out, but at least he got to see my smiling face and the Randall. So yeah, so that was 2018, and then 2019. Basically, then the fish I wanted, there was a few fish I wanted, and they were predominantly the big males in the top lake. So with this sort of me thinking that there was a sight feeding element to the males, I wanted to develop a bait which was more visual, because I was using for the big theme. Well, generally speaking, in fish meal terms, I was using what you would generally call a HMV fish meal. I wasn't using it for HMV purposes, which we can get into in a bit. but it was a heavy fish meal, 30% low temperature fish meal, um, whey gel, pre-digested fish meal, hydrolyzed liver. So it was a high biological value fish meal, very nutritional, but it was dark, as fish meals tend to be. So I wanted a bright visual bait. The other thing was in 2018, I got my Grenville ticket, and that's a big, deep, clear pit. And I noticed that people were catching on, you know, these commercial baits, which we don't want to name names, but some of them are quite bright, and they were putting a lot of bait out, and they were catching fish.
Is this, sorry to interrupt, is this bright feed baits you mean? Or
Yeah.
bright pop-ups?
No, bright feed. On Grenville, people will basically, Paul, the owner of Grenville, feeds his fish a very nutritional bait, a fish meal, which he makes himself. And the fish are indescribably healthy. The pictures don't do them justice. You look at the skin. He puts sort of oils with vitamin E in, and the skin it's just the works of art. You've never seen fish as healthy in your life because he puts toasted I think it's toasted sesame and other oils in, and they're just absolutely beautiful. So my point is, there's a lot of that going in. So certain commercial baits are not as nutritional, but people are catching on them because they're shellfish. And once, as you know, once one fish dives down, the others start feeding because it sort of initiates sort of competitive feeding. So I thought, well, they're obviously swimming around. Grenville's deep, you know. In the shallow bits, it's 17, 18 foot. In the deep bits, it's 36 foot. And the average depth is 26 foot, maybe. So I had it in my mind that they were swimming around mid-water, and if they see a big baited patch, then they'll drop down. It's not quite as simple as that. Grenville's all about location. But I thought, if I have a visual bait, then I think if they see it and they drop down, I can make it attractive enough that they will eat it and I will catch them. So that was the theory. But I also wanted to use something similar on Acton, so it sort of tied in. So in 2019, I basically developed a bait where I call it Grenville's Golden Balls. And basically, I took all the fish meal out and made it's sort of got Super Gold 60, which is maize protein, which is like a lovely golden colour. It's got some oragel, a super high concentration of pre-digested fish meal, and then it has garlic and turmeric in it. So when it washes out, it's pretty bright. Initially, it's bright gold, and then obviously I think some of the turmeric will leach out over the hours, but it's still a visual bait. And anyway, 2019, basically Rob put a load of stockies in. I'm trying to think when it was. Was it February? I think it was either November 18 or February 19. He put 60 stockies in the top lake. And I thought the fish were really, a lot of the fish on Acton were sort of once a year fish, twice a year fish. Some of them got caught a lot more because they were super pressured, like the otter. I think my first year, the otter come out 9 times, but every time it came out, it was up a couple of, a pound, 2 pounds. So it was absolutely smashing the bait. Anyway, 2019 was a complete game changer because the fish which never used to come out, like say the first bay mirror, which would might do 2 captures a year, come out 5 times in 2019 because there was no bait lying around. But I had the worst season ever, and I put it down to because my edge is my baits. I'm not a good caster in any stretch of the imagination. I have no interest in rigs. I'm absolutely obsessed with bait, feeding, and everything what goes with it. And I think because the stockies were absolutely smashing any bait what was lying around, the Acton fish didn't get. They used to leave bait. With having a 48-hour rule, or 72 a fortnight, there was a big turnover of anglers. So people would turn up, they'd bait up. If they didn't catch, generally speaking, there's some bait there. So the fish used to leave the bait for various reasons. A lot of it was due to angling pressure, and some of it's due to the fact that if lads were using bait out of the bag, the bait becomes more attractive as one, it softens up, and two, as there's bacterial action from the the microbiology of the lake acts on the bait and makes it more attractive, more digestible, and being older fish, the pharyngeal teeth are probably not quite as good, so they probably prefer a softer bait. But certainly, it wasn't a place for a quick bite. You generally get a bite at the end of your 48 if you was going to get one. Generally speaking, it's not nailed on. So, I've lost the plot now. Yeah, so basically, the 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 stockies forced the originals to feed quicker on the bait, and there was nothing lying around. So a lot of people were landing on fish and catching fish which were previously almost uncatchable. But for whatever reason, bad luck, bad location, whatever, I really struggled. I caught a lot of stockies, but I really struggled for the originals. I finished 2019 with 3 originals. I had a 34. I had an ultra spawned out little dollop, which does 40. It'll go up to 42, but I had it at 34 2. I had a character called the Car Crash Common, which looks like it's been kicked in the head. It's got a beautiful body, but its face is knackered. And it's about £35. And I had a male in the spring at 36.12. So I had a really terrible season. But the point I want to make of this, that was on the new bait. But I stuck with it because I thought it had mileage. I nicked a couple of 40s off Grenville on it as well, which bolstered my confidence on it on solid bags. One morning I went down in September and I put 3 solid bags out the night before, and I had a brace of 40s. I had a 40 pound 10 and a 42.6 half linear. So that gave me confidence in the bait, so I stuck with it. And then so that was 2019. In 2020, which is the season started, I stuck with the bait. As an aside, in 2019 there was an angler on the lower a new member joint, and he absolutely ripped it a new one. And this is my point about confidence in bait. This lad, you've never seen anybody catch as many fish in your life on the lower. I think he had about 60 odd fish. A lot of them stockies, but he was the first one to catch the Randall when it went 50. And I thought this kid's doing something with his bait. And I had a chat with him a couple of times, and he opened up, and he was switched on. A lad called Tony Solis, really good angler, and he absolutely ripped that one and lower. So if people don't believe that bait makes a difference, then that lad just proved it beyond any measure of a doubt. Just an awesome season's angling, unbelievable. And he was into sort of, I'm not going to give his secrets away, but he was big on fermentation and particles. And he just, honestly, hats off to him. He just did an amazing job on the lower. And even when he went up on he did his week on the top, and I think he had 6 fish out in his week, including one called Big Pecs, which is a male about 43 pound. And that is another, when we talk about the difference between males and females, and commons and mirrors, I've noticed that like fish like Big Pecs gets caught a lot on particle. Like people, one of the lads we call Stu the Taxi, he was the first one. Basically, Acton's got a lot of rud in it, so people tend to fish boilie only. And I had in 2016, I was sat in a swim called Potbeds, and there was a swim next door called Reeds, and no one ever fished it. And I had a thought that I could start baiting it, and if I couldn't get in Potbeds, then I could get in next door. And if I started baiting it, no one would be fishing it, given that Acton is hugely pressured. And I thought I will put, because of the rud, I was thinking I'll put chickpeas Amazing. Anyway, I never did it. But in I think it was 2018, Stu started ladling amazing. When he was doing his week, he must have took about 60 kilos, something like that. And they didn't get on it for 3 days, and then it was on the night of the new moon. It kicked off, and he pulled out in his week in 4 days. He pulled out 16 originals partially because it was novel. He hadn't seen a massive hit at bay, and no one was using maize. So, but he had big pecs as well. So you start noticing these patterns where certain fish are prone to particles, certain fish come out on a bright pop up. So yeah, so fast forward to 2020, and there's a couple of fish I really wanted. One's called the peach, which is a low 40 male. It sometimes sort of runs around 39s, but it's a good scrapping fish. My mate Cov had it in the middle of the lake, and he said it was down at the dam wall. He had to wade the full length of the margin to try and get it back. It's just mental. So that I wanted that one, and there's another one called the doubleback, which is it's black. It is absolutely black, and it's got some starburst going on. A stubby dorsal comes out quite a lot. It's not one of the rarer fish, but it's just absolutely beautiful. And that's a male as well. So it went down in 2020 in whatever it was, 1st, 2nd of June. We did the draw. Because of furlough, there was a record number of people turning up. There were 17 anglers turned up. I came out 10th in the draw and got my second choice swim, so I was well happy. Anyway, while we stood on the damn wall waiting for the draw, because you could see the double back was there. You can see it's got a stubby dorsal, and it was right in front of us. Anyways, I really wanted that fish. So I set up in pot beds, and I had the following morning. We did the first night. Following morning, I got a run. Absolutely beat me up. Nearly had it on for an hour. It was just mental. Anyway, there were a couple of new members. They came from next door, and I was out in my chesties, and this fish would not give up. And I could see it in the water because I had it right up. I nearly netted it 2 or 3 times, and I could see it wasn't a monster, but it was decent. And then while I was playing this fish, the middle rod ripped off. Bear in mind, Acton does not do double runs. The other rod went off, but as that rod went off, I seen a little stocking nut out. I'd probably spooked by the take. So one of the new members picked the other rod up and started playing it for me. And I said, "Oh, knock it off! It's a stocky," just as a joke. Anyway, after nearly an hour, I landed the double back. I didn't know it was until I netted it, and then played the other fish, and the other fish was a 32 mirror as well. So that was like a mental double take on opening week this season. That was June 2020, and that was on the bright bait. And then I had a 29 common on it the following morning. So 3 fish on opening, opening sort of week was a result. So that was confidence in the bait. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, I was up in the old shallows swim. In the old shallows, you hardly have any water at all. It's literally a really tight swim, but it was really hot, and I thought, conditions were fine. So basically, I put 3 rods on one spot, spawned about 100 baits over it. Bearing in mind what I've said about disturbance is an absolute killer on Acton. It certainly was before the stockies were there. If you put a lead on a fish, all you see is like a parting of the Red Sea and the fish is gone. So 3 rods out, 100 baits over them. Within 45 minutes, I got a take. And then, eventually when I landed, it was a peach, which was my main target for the year. So that was like, I was just so happy, and it's a male. It was 4110. So I was just overjoyed, and it sort of further confirmation. I've spotted out, say 100 boilies, 120 boilies in one spot, and within 45 minutes, it's obviously swum over that, dropped down, and I've had a bite. So that sort of reinforces my view that mirrors are more prone, male mirrors are more prone to sight feeding. Um, Obviously, the debate was super attractive, and we talked about, was it Dean who you asked the question, how do you go about a sort of time released attraction?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've been given a real good account of your angling. I haven't wanted to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
you're doing a good job, mate. You are made for podcasts, I tell you that. Um, it was Dean. Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. I mean, you can finish filling us in on your angling
Yeah.
history if you want, but yeah, it was Dean that we spoke to about. I asked him if he had any tactics for kind of like prolonged release of attractors within the water within the water. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, I'll go back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So I had the peach, and then come sort of what we're talking end of August, we had a decent low pressure, decent winds. Wasn't a mega low pressure, and I thought conquer. Conquer in 2016 and 2017. It commands middle of the lake, commands a lot of water for Acton. Bear in mind, Acton's sort of like a crescent shape, a banana shape, if you like, with the middle bit being the widest bit. But it's only 15 acres. So in 2016 and 2017, Conquer was hot. It did nearly all the big fish. You couldn't get in it, but it really did some beautiful fish. Anyway, in 18, it didn't fish well because African, which commands the shallows, fished really well because of the super hot temperatures. In 19, with the stockies in, fish were coming out from all over. Anyway, end of August, we had this. The weather was absolutely cock on. It was cool. It was raining, low pressure. I'm pretty sure the moon phase was decent. I thought conquer all day. I spoke to someone else who was on the lake, and he said he was the only one on. So I turned up, got there about 10 o'clock. It's just starting to absolutely leather it down. And I pulls up in Conquer, and my mate Declan's there. He comes out of his bivvy, looks at me, and I just thought, you wanker. And I wanted that swim so badly. And he's all dry, set up. There's fish, he said there's fish showing. And I was just like, oh, you know the feeling, don't you? That sinking feeling. So I was thinking about going opposite in First Bay, but it was starting to absolutely leather it down. And it means it's a barrow job. It's not a big barrow, but 3 barrow trips and you're wet. So I set up in Africa in the shallows, put my bivvy up, got set up. I'd a lead about because I hadn't fished African much that season, and the sort of weed moves about. With it being shallow, there's weed there. Anyway, long story short, I got absolutely drowned setting up. I mean, absolutely drowned. Got all set up. I said to him, I said, I've brought my bait in A game this time, but he was on the fish and I wasn't. And it ended up being a really good trip because whenever I fish next to Declan, I always do well in E blanks normally. Because the last time I'd fished next to him when I was in Africa was when I had the slope and the First Bay, a brace of 40s, and he blanked. so it's great because I kick him out of bed at 2:30 in the morning when he's blanking, and I've got a fish, so we can sort of rub it in, which always pleases him immensely, as you can imagine. So yeah, that trip was absolutely amazing. I found with African, you've got the sort of two sides to it. You can either go right up to the shallow, really up to the shallows, or you've got the area we sort of call the triangle because it's sort of the middle bit of 3 swims. And depending where you think the fish might be is where you put your rods. So I found a real nice spot to the left in the sort of triangle area. So I thought, right, I'm going to put 2 rods on one spot. I did a lot of leading about and a lot of marking and messing about because I was trying to keep her away from the swans, and got 2 real decent drops for silt. And then I spotted a lot of bait. I put a lot of fermented particle out, mixed in with a boilie, and one on the normal banker middle, which is my normal middle rod. I put one on that spot, and I ended up with 4 originals. I had, what did I have? There's an ancient. There's 2 fullies in Acton Top, the big fully and the little fully. The big fullies, I had it at 28.12, and the little fullies about 25.26. But I think they're old lanies. They were in the time, I think they've been in there since like when Maddox fished it in the 80s. They're absolutely stunning fish. Might be wrong on that, but they're old fish, and they're absolutely beautiful. And I'd never had any of the fullies. So I really wanted them, and the first fish was the big fully at 28.12. So that made me trip. And then a recast in the dark, and I had a common called the Dish Common at 33, which was my old UK PB. I had it in 2016 at 34, and that was my old UK PB common. And then I recast again, and I had a beautiful male, really dark sort of slate grey male, and it still had its end of August. It still had some tubercles on it because the weather had been up and down. Some of the fish didn't actually spawn till nearly August. One of which was my last fish, which was the fish called Little Dollop, which I'd had the year before at 30, or 2 years before at 30. No, sorry, a year before at 35.4. Anyway, a lad called Kev had the Little Dollop in either June or July at 46, which is 4 or 5 pounds. Basically, it was spawn bound. It's 4 or 5 pounds above its normal weight. It just looked enormous. And then it got caught again at 44, and it still hadn't spawned around, I think, around July. Anyway, I had it, and it was bang on 40, so it spawned. And that was the last fish of the trip, the Little Dollop. So, because I said I wouldn't mind it as a recapture just at 40, just because I know we all say, oh, it doesn't matter what weight it is, but if you catch it one of the A team and it's not 40, you want it at 40. You know, I know people say it doesn't matter. It does. Yeah. So it's just one off the box. So that was a good trip in end of August, and then I started going down to Grenville. Grenville's a long way. It's 175 miles each way, so it's an horrible trip down the A1 for me. It's a big lake, and Paul's very keen about the rules because you've sort of got to walk round the lake, drop your bucket or a net or something, go back and get your car, unload, take your car back to the car park, then start setting up, trying to find a clear spot. So it's quite a protracted setting up procedure. So if you're only going for 48 hours, it's you know what I mean. And it's a 3-hour drive each way. Then it's quite involved, shall we say? But as you know, most people who know about Grenville know what's in there, so you put up with it. But my point is, I don't go as much as maybe some local anglers because of the distance involved. But anyway, so I went down in September. Grenville is in people. It's got a massive stock of about, best guess, 1,800 fish in 72 acres. That's but crazy. The volume of water is such that it's like 210 acres because it's 36 foot deep and the average depth's about 26 foot. So in 3D, in a 3D image, there's a lot of water there. Half the lake is unfishable to most anglers. There's a few people who can absolutely beast a solid bag. Just you've not seen anything like it. These lads are just animals. There's something like 3 Team England lads on there. There's lads who've won the British Carp Angling Championships. The technical skills on the Grenville anglers is just next level. I can't compete anything like that because I'm not a distance caster. I've never fished big waters. But I like having a go because one, it takes me out of my comfort zone. It's a new skill to develop, and also the fish are just mental. Just out of reference, Paul doesn't know exactly the size of all the fish, but he keeps all records. He's got pictures of them going in at £5, and then he's got every capture of them over £30, and most of them he's got every capture of when it was caught, how big it was. And half the time he's got all the pictures because every fish over £30, you have to photograph both sides. He weighs them, he takes the pictures in immaculate condition. There could be anywhere up to 150 40s in there. There's something like 13 fish over £50 in there, topped by 2 which have done 60. I mean, one of them came out at 59 something this year. because they had a really good spawn. Well, this is last year, they had a really good spawn last year. So there's two. There's like a green 124 and a green 123, I think. And one of them's done the late record at 65.12 twice, and the other one's done 61.12 at its biggest. It came out like a couple of ounces under 60. So see, and there's also the old late record hasn't been out for about 7 years, but that was 7 years ago. It did 56. So there's at least two potential sixes swimming around, possibly more. But it's hard. It's rock hard, because the thing is, when I turn up I don't know any of the lads on there because I'm not local. A lot of the lads have come from places like Elstone, Monks, so they sort of know each other. Me being a northern monkey, I don't really know anybody. And on big lakes, location is everything. If you can find out where the fish are before you arrive, you know, some of the really good technical anglers on there, if they get on fish and they can fish at extreme range and bait at extreme range, they can have a good hit of fish. I mean, lads have had 20 fish in a 3-dayer or even a 2-dayer. I've never caught anything like that. But the one thing I have is my bait. So I've not fished it that much, and I've only had 13 fish. But my average size is pretty good, and I put that. Some of it's the element of chance. I mean, despite what anybody says, I always say it's better to be lucky than good. Mm. But technically, you could call it the element of chance. If you land on the area where there's big fish and you catch them, someone else could have 20 pounders. Mm. That's you can't determine that. But I do believe that bait plays a part, and we can talk about that in a bit. Yeah, so I think I went for the Open. He opens it in 17th of July, and I think I caught on my second trip. I had a 21 pounder, which is small from there, but beautiful scaly fish. He breeds his own fish as well, which is just you've not seen fish like them. They're just ridiculous. Basically, what he's done is he got the best ever lot of simmos which were ever produced. That spawning produced the Vinitro 60 and the fish Paul got, and these are the ones which are doing high 50s and 60s. He's put some Andy Parker fish in back in the day, and they're sort of Sutton dinks, and they're quite slow growers but stunning. And then I think he got some scaly simmos and some commons. And basically, I think his daughter went to Sparshall or some fishery management school, and basically they collected the spawn, reared them on, and he's got all stock ponds. And he does of a natural spawn, he's got those 3 genetic lines. And what they've come out is they've got the growth rate of the best ever line of simmos, and they've got the scaly pattern of the Sutton dinks. So they're absolutely stunning. And he obviously grades the ones he wants and puts them in the lake. So it's got just an immense stock. So yeah, so I started off on I blanked, I think, the first couple of trips. I think the third trip I had the 20, and then I went down. My mate John was going down. It was big weather, and on there it's just a wild place. You get a breeze. You look on the weather app, and it's got 17 mile an hour wind, and then you go on there, and people are surfing. It's just mental. It's in Cambridgeshire. It's just a beast of a lake. It's just unbelievable. Anyway, I set up next to my mate John. Spotted a load of bait out. It's all distance work, so I think I was doing about 110, which is about into a wind, which is pretty good for me. Some of the lads can just chuck obscene distances, but I'm not one of them. Anyway, so sort of first that was sort of lunchtime, and then I've seen a couple of shows, I think, the following morning to my left. So I basically tied up some solids and just didn't clip them up and just launched them as far as I could. And this is on the golden bait. But since talking to Tony, the lad who absolutely ripped the lower lake at Acton a new one, he was obsessed with turning baits. In my solid bags, basically, I had some of this what I call my Grenville's golden balls, which has got a lot of Bella can in as well. I don't even put any liquids in it at the moment. I just put a shit ton of Bella can. It's got a lot of pre-digested fish meal. It's got the maize in it and Brocacel. What I've found with baits containing Brocacel and maize is they turn really quick. So I've had this bag of boilers and I keep putting it in the freezer, taking it out, and I'm making my solid bags out of them. And I'm putting grinding them up with the crusher, but leaving sort of nuggets in rather than taking it down to dust. I'm putting nuggets in, so there's a lot of attraction there. It lasts longer. Basically, on Grenville, you have massive undertows because it's a big pit. You've got the wind going one way, the undertows going the other way. I'm not convinced if you put a solid bag of dust out, how much is left for how long. So my thinking was, if I get some nuggets of boilie in, put a little stick over, basically I blitz down some of it to dust, and I put a little stick over the hook, and then I can get some nuggets in without impaling the hook. Get it all tight, all really tight, and then and those solid bags have done me 240s in 2018 on their own, and then into September last year, which is in 2020, I had a 4-fish hit on the solids, just casting as far as I could. But one of the fish was a 48-pounder, which was, I think, the 13th biggest fish in the lake, but down. It was about 3 pound down from the previous year. Because Paul's got you've got the graphs of when it came out, what it did. And that was just a mental trip. It was big winds. There's a lot of milfoil as it comes up the shelf, and basically the fish weeded me up because there's like 6-foot fronds of milfoil and you can't drag the fish through. So Paul says, don't rip its head off, just put your rod down. So I got that take about midnight-ish, and I stood over my rod for 3 hours in the pissing rain when it was, it'd go off and then you'd wind it in this milfoil again. And then sort of about 3 in the morning, I'd actually got back on my bed with my waders on, waiting for it to go again. And the last attempt, it came in. I played it for quite a bit. Anyway, you can't. The big fish, you're not allowed to get out of the water on your own. You've got to just if it's stupid o'clock, you've got to sling them up and bring Paul in the morning, and he'll bring the lake scales round and do the photographs. So I looked at this fish and I thought, oh, it looks 40 pound. The thing about the Grenville fish is they're always about 10 pound heavier than you think they are because they're just absolutely solid. So when we lifted it out, Paul came around in the morning about 6, 7 o'clock, whatever time it was, lifted it out, and that fish went 48 pound, which was wonderful. And then the week after that, the swim I was in, which was 16, all this milfoil was just a nightmare. It was just hard work fishing through. So Paul went out in the boat, got a couple of lads, and he was going out in the boat, dropping a big drag, and then the lads, like 3 or 4 of them, were hauling it in to clear all this. So he told everybody he was doing it. So I thought, well, I'm going to go as far away from there as possible. One, so I'm not in his way, and secondly, I don't want to be anywhere near someone where they're dropping a drag just for the disturbance. So I set up in a swim no one ever really fishes called in 36, and I found a decent spot at 96 yards. And I put this is the ironic thing. I think I'd run out of some bait ingredients, so I just threw a bait together, a liver fish meal, just threw it together, put loads of hemp powder in. It was a good bait, but it was literally just I was just weighing it out and making it up as I went along. I bricked it and then chopped it up into bits, and I soaked it in some hemp juice and then unusual liquids. Put that out and then put 3 solids over it. And first night nothing. Second night about half 1. So it's like my final morning, if you like. at 1:30, I got a take. Came in like a sack of shit. To be fair, it really didn't do anything. I thought, oh, it's a scraper 20. You've got to get in the water. Your nets are staked out in the water, because you're not allowed to bring them near the platforms. So I looked down on the back of this fish. Thought, oh, it's a 20. Set all my self take stuff up because it was a lovely scale. I thought I'm getting a picture anyway because I don't catch much. Did all the self takes and everything, get it all set up. Went to get it out of the water, and I thought, nah, that's a 30. I better sling that up. And it was like nearly a fully scaled. I thought that's touching 30. So I slung it up. You've got to put storm poles in your net retainer, so then it's not bashing on. The fish care there is you've never seen fish care like it. Of what the equipment you've got to have. You've got to leave it on the lake for so there's no biocontamination. You've got to carry propolis and ulcer swab. Anyway, so I staked this fish out, and then I got another run. So I'm playing that. Give it a decent fight, not mental. The thing is, there's a bit of I'm on Acton. I use my 12-foot ISIBs, and they're quite soft, and you sort of play a fish, you feel it. When I'm using 13-foot ISIBs on 13-foot ISs on Grenville, and you've got a lot more control of the fish. The rods are a lot stiffer, so they don't feel as big, if you know what I mean, rather than as they do on an IS on a 12-footer. So I caught this fish. I thought, oh, that's a 40 all day. That's a 40. So I slung it up again. Rang Paul in the morning. He came around with the scales. Got the first one out, the fully. That went just under 33. Just the best looking fish you've ever seen. It's just utter carp palm. Just mental. And then the other fish, I thought, well, it's a 40. Lifted it out, and that went 51. Which was, I was just, my head fell off then. And that fish hadn't been out for three and a bit years. It were last out at something like 42, and Paul sent me the graph. He's got a fucking graph of all its captures. So in 2 weeks, I'd had the 13th and the 14th biggest fish in the lake out of 1,800. And the whole season, I'd only had 7 fish, and 2 of them, like one of them was a 48, and the other one was, and two a couple of 30. So it was. My average size is quite high relative to the number of fish I catch.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think I don't know whether big fish are more sensitive to chemoreceptive stimulus, or the more nutritionally aware. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but there certainly seems to be trends. One, in terms of fish size, and 2, in terms of I'm of the opinion now that you can load your baiting strategy to catch certain fish, and it's been a long evolution. I think I mentioned when I chat to you, I went to Dream Lakes first time ever in France in 2011, and I was fishing Lake 4, and there were a lot of cats in the lake because all the information's online. So I thought, there's no way I'm taking a fish meal if it's full of cats. So I made a nut mix, and it was a full fat roasted peanut meal, about 20% or thereabouts, 20% tiger nut, some lamb lac, which is another high fat bait. Well, this wasn't a purposeful thing. This was just a standard nut mix I did at the time, and I absolutely rinsed it. It was unbelievable, and it was super hot, super high pressure. The daytime temperatures were 33 degrees. It was, blue skies, no wind, not a breath of air, and I was getting bites. Like, I wasn't getting up till sort of late-ish. I wasn't taking it seriously as such, and I was baiting up, and within half an hour I'd have a fish, and I ended up with 25 fish by the Thursday. And it was wasn't fishing well. Some people, the other 3 lads on the lake had 3 fish in the whole week, and I had 25 by the Thursday in 5 days. I ran out of my own bait. bought some of the house bait and didn't catch another fish. So I thought, that's a result. Didn't analyze it other than I was happy with what I caught. And then in 2011, I started on Selby Three Lakes in North Yorkshire. I went in with a fish meal. And at the time, you could get the original L030, and I was obsessed with L030. I would have had a bath in it if I could. It was just a wonderful additive. And I caught quite a lot of mirrors, some decent, some stockies. A third of the stock of Selby was commons, and I didn't catch any decent commons. The biggest common I had, I think, was. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that anything over 25 on Selby at the time was a big fish. There was quite a few 20s, but there was nothing massive in there, apart from the original mirrors. There were 2 original 30s mirrors, which were the ones I joined for. And then the second season, I fished the fish meal. Third season was 2013. I had Rosie, which was one of my target fish, on a red fish meal. She was an absolute sucker for a red fish meal. A lot of the lads were using Icelandic red from Carp Company.
Oh, that's great bait.
Yeah, well, one of the lads was on a bait deal, so he used to order hundreds of kilos and then give it to the lads on the lake and probably put £1 on it or whatever. But consequently, there was a lot of Icelandic red going in. I was using a red fish meal, with like full fat GLM, liver. Just I was learning about bait then. I got really serious about bait in 2010. So when I started on there in 2011, I had a good recipe and a few variations. You try like full fat GLM or spirulina or something. But the point is, I caught a decent amount of mirrors, but I wasn't getting any of the big commons. There was a few commons at sort of around £25, which I know nationally that's not a big fish, but we're talking North Yorkshire here 10 years ago. So in so I had one of my target fish, Rosie. The other target fish died in 2013 because these 2 fish, all the others had died as well, a lot of the originals, but these were stocked in 1973. So they were sort of as old as I was nearly, assuming that they were 3, 4, 5 years old when they were stocked. They were the same age as me. So I had one of them, the other one died. And here's another thing. The other one, the mirror Clarence, big long torpedo over 30, used to go up to about 35, would get caught on all sorts. Absolutely all sorts. Strangely enough, the biggest common in there when I joined was a scar common. It finished up at 39 summit and died, but when I was there, when I joined in 2011, it was £28, and then it went up to about 32. For a common, that would get caught on a lot of baits. But obviously a lot of ice red was going in. But Rosie was a sucker for fish meal. She hardly ever got caught. She'd either get caught on trigger occasionally, or nearly all ice red. And I had her on a red fish meal. So I mean, you were talking to, was it Dean? You were talking about preferences.
I think we've mentioned it a few times.
Times.
Yeah.
Certain fish have preferences. Now I'm absolutely sold on preferences. Anyway, there were some commons I wanted in there. There was a beautiful fish called a baby scar common, which was only £25, but it was just a mint dark fish with a big bald patch on it. Didn't come out much. And there was a few other commons over £25, which, for North Yorkshire, they were big fish. I know people, a £25 common if you fish bundies is a, what people call the shitter. But for me, these were sought after fish. Yeah. So I went in with my nut mix. I think in 2013, one lad started on the cell, and he absolutely rinsed it. Now, Selby is a deep clay pit. It's like an old brick pit. So it's quite deep. The sides go straight down. It's sort of pad-lined. And he absolutely rinsed it. He had the 3 biggest fish out, all 3 of them, which he had Rosie on cell, which, again, she was an Icelandic. It's just one of those things. He was the first one on it, really. And he did well. And then everybody else jumped on it. And then they weren't catching. The results weren't nearly as much as when he was on it. But anyway, the point was, I'd seen fish circling. There's a sort of central bar, which there's two lakes. Selby Lakes 2 and 3 were separate lakes, and then they'd made a cut through. But there's like a full bar across, so you've almost got it's almost like 4 lakes, as in 40 yards across. You've got an island, what looks like a star-shaped island, which runs the bar runs almost the full length of the lake. So the fish tend to patrol round that bar, go through the cut-throughs, come back. And I've seen the fish. There was a couple of koi in there, so you could see them when they were swimming past. I can't remember. I went in with my nut mix, and I seen the fish swim over my bait loads of times because I could see this koi with them. And then all of a sudden, one dropped down. The koi dropped down, and all the others dropped down, and I had a bite straight away. So it was in my mind about visible baits with Wayne catching on the cell, because I know roughly what's in the cell because they put the list of ingredients on the bag and the nutritional breakdown. So if you know anything about bait, you know pretty much what's in it. So I was thinking, these fish are up in the water, swimming around. You can see the bait, they know it's there, and then at some stage they'll drop down. So I had to play about, and I thought, right, is it the cell? Is it the activator, or is it the base mix? Well, the base mix is nothing special. I thought it's got to be the activator. So I made my nut mix in two variations. I made one with maple, condensed milk flavour and cream kajousa, and the other one with activator. And to be fair, it was the maple bait which sort of performed better. And at that time, I think it was around that time that Sean Harrison was talking about soaking his baits up. I think he might have been on Grenville at the time. But he was on about soaking them up with particle juice to soften them up. So I thought I can incorporate that in with a bait, but put some extra attraction in. I had in my mind that commons are reputed to be attracted by molasses, by CSL, by tiger nut, maize, things like that. So my approach, my game plan was to make a bait which everything I could think of which would attract a common I would put in, because I wasn't catching the commons on my fish meal. So I made a nut mix. That was 2014. It was really, really hot, really hot. So I was making the nut mix. I was soaking it. I was basically fermenting particle pigeon conditioner. And in the pigeon conditioner, I was putting a load of molasses, high fructose corn syrup, citric acid, ascorbic acid. Then I was soaking it and then boiling it, let it cool down, stick it in a barrel with an airlock on, put an high alcohol tolerance wine yeast in. I got an industrial amylase off a lad who worked for distillers, so I whacked that in. And the sort of theory was to get an high alcohol content in it, but also the amylase would remove the starches. And I was putting meat tenderizing powder in to sort of attack the gluten's of the particle. And then the game plan was to use it as a soak with the boilies, but put some CSL in as well, because CSL is reputed to attract commons. So I had this sort of, the beauty about Selby is you could bait up on the heads. This is the thing what Patrick Mills was saying about attraction, is you've got to keep baiting it up. Selby was great in that you could literally bait up on their heads, they'd go and they'd be back in half an hour because they used to circulate this island. So I knew the enzymes were working because the baits were turning into mush. And I'd only bait up in the day and like sort of between 10 and 30 boilers with a catapult every hour. And I had a washing up bowl on the bank. I'd pour the particle juice, which was fermenting actively, high alcohol content. I'd pour that into a washing up bowl, a generous dollop of the CSL, stick the boilies in. Once the boilies started fizzing, they were ready to go, stuck them in. And I absolutely rinsed it for commons. I finished on 47 fish for the season, when my previous best was, first season I had 21 fish, mostly mirrors. Second, I had about 20 fish. Third year, I think I had 30 fish. This season I had 47 fish, and a lot of them commons. I had the baby scar twice. I had a fish I call the perfect common. I had the second biggest common, which we called Holmes's common. I had that 3 times. And I had the biggest remaining mirror, which hadn't been out for 2 years. So, but the proportion of commons was much higher and bigger. So I thought, obviously, the CSL, the molasses, the particle, and everything else was absolutely working. But the other thing I noticed, 2014 was nuclear hot, and there were times when I was catching when no one else was catching, and I was catching in the day, like the heat of the day. Now Selby was a strange lake. The bite time was sort of 9 o'clock. You could catch from first light, but at 9 o'clock, 9 a.m., you were sat on your hands. If you were going to get a bite, 9 o'clock was the time. And then you wouldn't catch much, sort of about 10, 11 o'clock. If you hadn't had a fish, then you were scratching. You might get one in the afternoon, but towards the evening. But 9 o'clock was the bite time. But I was catching, in the heat of the day, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when it was 30 degrees, and I was catching fish. And in one session, I had seven fish, not only stockies, not nothing big. But for me to catch 7 and no one else had a fish on the lake, I thought, something going on here. And then I was thinking, I can't remember when I came to the conclusion. I also remember reading a Hutchie. I wasn't around when Rod the Mod was in his prime, but I remember reading an old article, and Rod said, when it's really hot, he's always done best on bird food baits. Well, that was filed away in the memory. He didn't elaborate as to why, and that was sort of in my mind. And then I was thinking about it, and then when in 2018, when Acton died a death on the fish meals and it was so hot, I had this sort of light bulb moment where I thought, I think it's dissolved oxygen. I think there's a link between dissolved oxygen and Carp's willingness to eat a super high protein bait. In that, when it's really hot, the water temperature is hot, so dissolved oxygen is low. Carp struggle to metabolize a huge amount of protein in boilie form. If they take a load of boilie in the gut, and then they start enzymatically digesting it, they need oxygen to metabolize it. Well, if in low DO, they go torpid. They don't really do a lot. There's no shortage of protein in the lake. So I thought, what can I do to try and engineer a bite here? And I thought about the Dream Lake session when it was hot. I thought about Selby in 2014. And I thought, well, the link there's a nut mix. I thought, is it as simple as it's a visible bait, or is it a metabolic thing? And I thought about it more. This isn't like an immediate thought. This is like mulling it over weeks when you sat there blanking and you're sweating your nads off. It's it's boiling hot, and you're thinking, what can I do here? And I came to the conclusion, and then I remember what Rod said about a bird food bait. And in terms of food value, an out-and-out bird food bait doesn't have a lot of protein in it. It's if you look at bird foods generally, they've got seeds in, a bit of egg biscuit, yada, maybe a bit of cod liver oil or whatever. But what they've not got is a lot of high biological value proteins in them. So the other thing was the timing of the baits in the heat of the day. So I came to the conclusion that it was the fat in the nut mix that they wanted in this super low dissolved oxygen, super high pressure Because the one thing they're not getting in the lake is fat. If you think about it, in a lake in the height of summer, there's loads of protein about. There's probably not a lot of natural carbohydrate, but in a nut bait, the digestible protein, there's not a lot of digestible protein in it. In high water temperatures, a fish eats a nut mix. You get them in your net or your sling, and they're shitting out the nut mix, and you can feel it, and it's like nut paste. They haven't taken a huge amount out of it, but what I think they are taking out of it is some of the fat content. And I remember I did human physiology at uni, so I know I did a bit of exercise physiology and bio, and metabolism, biochemical metabolism, and what have you. And I think I discussed with you that basically when humans burn fat per energy yielded, they utilize less oxygen for a given energy yield. And I wondered if the carp were feeling the benefit in terms of what's called biological oxygen demand, as in how much oxygen they need to survive and metabolize, if they were feeling a sort of an energy rush, or certainly felt more comfortable extracting the fat out of a nut mix and not having as much protein in it. And that is something that I need to try again on Acton, because I've not. By the time I'd sort of come to this conclusion that the summer was over and we were into autumn, and that's when I went after the Randall on the fish meal. So it's not something I've explored since, but I'm 100% certain that is the case.
As I say, in our recent podcast with Jason, that's something he spoke about as well, was carp metabolizing and getting energy basically from the fats and oils present. I've got to say, Stephen, it's fascinating sort of hearing you say this, because this is a theory I've had for a little while. And years ago, I used to use a nut mix. And again, what you're talking about with the attraction to commons in particular, I mean, that included CSL molasses. And Sam used to take the piss out of me for the water we fished, because I used to catch common after common after common. And Sam was getting all of the sort of like the desired sort of scaly mirrors. I can't remember what bait he was using at the time, and I was fishing my nut mix. And yeah, I was just catching common after common after common. And this year I'm targeting a particular water with a few big commons in it. And I've been discussing with Sam this week about sort of revisiting my nut mix to sort of target these fish. So everything you're sort of saying is like really, really, for me, fascinating and really interesting. It's sort of like hitting home a little bit, I guess. So I used to use as well, it's like you're saying, the peanut meal is particularly oily, and I used to use sesame seed oil alongside it as well. And it was a really particularly oily bait. And yeah, it used to really attract commons. I don't know if that's something you can expand on at all.
But I don't know why it does it. There's two facets to it. One, a nut mix is a visible bait. So I have this idea, because it's not, I can't quantify it or measure it. I can't find any literature on it. But commons are more akin to a wild fish. If you read stuff like Mark Holmes goes on about catching commons and dispute up dead roach and what have you, which is the wild. That's predatory feeding. Now predatory feeding. If carp are eating small roach and what have you, they're sight feeding. The silverfish, they're sight feeding. If they take a zig, they're sight feeding. That's not a chemoreceptive feeding. They're not detecting that roach and sniffing it because the roach is gone. They're using their eyesight and they're hitting that fish. So I'm of the opinion that commons, in particular male commons, and to some extent male mirrors, are more predatory, have a more predatory nature, which would tie in with the sight feeding. So if you're going after a common, one, chances are it's more prone to sight feeding. So a nut mix is a more visible bait, especially on like a clay pit like Selby. Secondly, all these things which are reputed to attract commons, such as CSL, molasses, maize, yeast to some extent, fermentation, alcohol. If you throw those things with a visible bait, then you're onto a winner, aren't you? Oh, not necessarily. It's not nailed on. What I'm trying to nothing in carp angling is nailed on. Mirrors will eat this bait. Like I said on Selby, I had the biggest remaining mirror in 2014. I haven't been out for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But you're trying to, if you want a tiger fish, like you're on this lake and say there's 3 big commons and you want them, then if I was going in, I would not be fishing a fish meal unless I knew that those fish come out on a fish meal.
Yeah.
If I was going in blind and I knew they were commons in the cold water, I would be using a nut mix, but I wouldn't be using roasted peanut meal. I would be using the defatted peanut protein.
Yeah.
But it would be the not too dissimilar a base mix.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be putting lamb lack in because lamb lack's got coconut fat in, which, as we all know, is highly saturated. But I would be using the peanut protein, tiger nut meal, and then obviously it gets warmer. Then I will be putting the roasted peanut meal in to get the fat content.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's got the visible bits, and I've been doing all the same things as with Selby, with the fermentation, with the molasses, with the CSL, because you're giving yourself the best chance. I think if I was going after a big, it depends on like say with Grenville, the shoalfish, you could have anywhere between a pod of 5 fish, or you could have 100 fish in your swim. So you have a competitive feed in there. Usually when one drops down, they all start feeding. That's different gravy. But if you're going after a big target fish on a hard water when the fish are moody, the other thing about lakes is you've got small lakes where you're on the fish most of the time, and they're usually riggy and difficult to catch, and that's where I think bait really pays dividends. If you can, if bait's your weapon of choice, because what they say is on little waters the fish are easy to find and hard to catch. On big waters they're hard to find and easy to catch.
Mm-hmm.
And I've generally found that to be true. So that was like my approach on Acton. Was one thing we've not mentioned is my main approach on Acton in terms of my baiting pattern. I've been in a couple of Facebook bait groups, and there's been some very, very good lads in there, and they've all got different skills. Lads with smaller bait companies, and they all have their own beliefs. We all have different approaches. Sean Harrison doesn't use fish meals, which me and Dino are absolutely obsessed with fish meals. Mm-hmm. But no one can argue with what Sean Harrison catches. So he's not wrong. It's just a different approach. Sean rinses everywhere he goes. Jason Ryder does, he does different stuff, doesn't he? He uses all his additives. You hear him talk about his wasp additives and all. Do you know what I mean? He goes down that approach. Anyway, when I was on Acton in 2016, and it's still, you see these fish fizzing up, and you see a massive patch of bubbles, but only one patch. So I came to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that these 60 originals or so, I reckon a lot of the big ones were lone feeders. So there was no competitive feeding. The other thing is, as I've mentioned, the baiting approach. I wouldn't have had this snapshot if I hadn't joined Acton in 2016, because it was at its lowest stock of fish that it's been for sort of 20 years, as the old originals have died off. Mm-hmm. And it was before he put the stockies in. So it was a unique snapshot in time. These fish have been pressured for like 30 years nearly. Big fish, a lot of males. And I noticed that you never saw a lot of these patches together. So I thought, these are lone feeders. And these 10 nights that I blanked when I first joined. But what am I going to do to get a fish here? And then a guy called Damien Turner we were discussing, some lads are into balancing aminos, as in true HMV theory states, if you supply everything a carp needs, then it will eat that bait in preference to anything else in the lake, including naturals. That was the holy grail of boilers as they came out with Fred Wilton. So some lads are still obsessed with balancing the aminos, and Patrick Mills made a reference to it, didn't he, where they say some people will supplement an amino which they believe. You look at the amino profile of the base mix, and they'll say, right, I might need 2 more grams of tryptophan in that for the sake of argument. So they might put that in as a single amino to balance the amino profile of the bait. But one, I think it's cobblers in an angling sense, depending on where you fish, because there's so many different baits going into lakes now. Lakes are so busy. Certainly in my experience, I can't pre-bait because my nearest water is 100 mile each way. My furthest water is 175 miles. If a swim does a fish or does a hit a fish, you can't get back in it the rest of the season. So you can't pre-bait. So the bait has to work from the off. Like on Acton, there's a lot of lads who are on key baits, ASM. So obviously everybody's putting it in, so the fish know what ASM is. There's loads of it goes in. Because when I joined Acton, one of the lads said to me, if you're not on ASM, you ain't catching, mate. I went, all right, here we go. We'll see on that. And then 10 nights in, I hadn't had a fish. I'm like, yeah, he might have a point here. But another point is, when I had my first fish on the 8th of July, 2016, the lake hadn't done a fish for 8 days. That's how moody it could be.
Yeah. There's
probably 5 or 6 lads on all week, not the same anglers, a turnover of anglers, but it hadn't done a fish for 8 days. Anyway, so I came to this conclusion that the big fish were lone feeders. So, and then also there was quite a lot of bait going in. Not loads, but there was what I'm saying is there's a big turnover of anglers. Every 48 hours there'd be someone waiting behind you to go in that swim. They'd put whatever bait out. Is it being eaten? Is it not? It's not doing a lot of fish. In 2016, I was told when I joined that if you did 6 fish in a full season, you'd be holding your own.
Mm-hmm.
So, they weren't giving themselves up. Anyway, Damo came up with this. They were talking about balancing aminos, first limited amino acids, which is basically what, if you're into HMV theory, FLAAs are the holy grail, and I think it's bollocks. But Damo said he'd read a paper where they were putting aminos in agar pellets and then measuring the leak off versus how much he's actually getting eaten. And there was something like 60 to 70% of the aminos were being blown out of the gills, out of the egg, when they were being chewed by the teeth. And he said, well, it's not worth balancing aminos with free-form amino acids. If you've got to make sure that your profile is done with whole proteins. But that was like, as I said to you before, it was like a road to Damascus biblical. My brain lit up and I had scalp tingles, and I thought, that is the way I'm going to catch these big fish. I thought, right, I'm going to load that bait with attraction, and it's going to work when the fish starts eating it, when it starts chewing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I'm not convinced. I'm of a scientific disposition. 1 cubic meter of water, is it 1 million mil?
Oh, mate.
It's 1,000 litres.
1,000 times. Yeah, it will be 1,000 times 1,000. Yeah.
1 cubic.
That's correct. Yeah.
So if you've got a boiler there, which is a sealed unit, you put an egg in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can't spawn liquids on these fish because any disturbance is the kiss of death. They're the most pressured fish on the planet. You can't do anything what you'd normally do. If you wanted to get attraction in a swim, like Patrick Mills was saying, every 20 minutes stick a big ball of sloppy shite in, and that's how the match lads do it, spodding over zigs, all that. You can't do that on Acton. Coupled with that, there's a load of rud, so you can't really use you can't use crumb because it wouldn't even hit the bottom. So I came to the conclusion that single fish, I will get it, I'll bait tight, I'll get it eating on a spot, and then as it blows all the attraction out of its gills, it'll self-stimulate.
Yeah.
It'll cause competitive feeding within itself rather than other fish because there's no other fish around it. So the only way I'm going to engineer a bite off that fish is for it to self-stimulate, get greedy, and I'll catch it that way. It'll make the rig inefficient because the fish isn't moving.
Yeah.
But the only way I can, I think if I put it out with a throwing stick, 30 baits all over a big area, by the time it's chewed once, swam 2 yards to the next bait, chewed that, swam again, it's washing all the stimulation off itself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no, it's like Patrick was saying about the localized stimulation. Well, how do you deliver that in boilie form? Because you can only use boilies, in my mind, which obviously Stu the Taxi, he proved you could do it with maize, but at the time I was thinking in terms of boilie, how could I deliver that attraction in a localized form and self-stimulate the big fish? So what I did was I basically upped the levels of pre-digested ingredients in the base mix. So it was like a 30% low temperature fish meal. And then at the time I was putting 3% caramine, 3% Barocacel, 12% CPSP 90 and 5% chicken liver hydro powder in it. And then harking back to what Sean said, back 6-7 years previous, I thought, right, I'm going to put a hot soak on it
Mm-hmm.
to give it some external attraction, which may or may not engineer a quick bite. But certainly these are older fish and they want a softer bait. So what I wanted was a bait which would retain its structural integrity, so the rud couldn't destroy it, but would have external attraction initially and had the powdered pre-digested in the base mix for when they chewed it. And then even if some of that leaked out, it's got 30% LT in it. So if it's sat out there for 48 hours, the lake bacteria begin hydrolyzing the proteins and producing free-form amino acids, organic acids, what have you. So I'm getting a time bomb from it's going in immediately. It's got external. Also, because it was 23% pre-digested, I was binding it with 10% Oragel. So when it come out of, I've cooked it, let it cool down, dried it out for a bit. It's like a rubber bullet because it's 10% whey gel.
Yeah.
And then but that would withstand the hot soak then.
Okay, so I was going to ask that. So regarding the hot soak, that's you're not taking them straight out of the boil and then soaking them.
No.
You're letting them cool down.
Cooling them down, drying them out for 24 hours, 48 hours, and then putting them in the freezer. When they come out of the freezer, first thing I do is absolutely lever them with Namplar, put them in a bucket, lever them with Namplar.
Yeah.
Make a hot water soak of some description. I've done all sorts. But when I did manage to get some powdered. Just as an aside, back in the day, I've seen the amino profile of wheat gluten, and going to the amino acids from Katsumi and Doven, the 2003 paper, the 7 Augusta trait amino acids. The one which stood out to me was L-glutamine because it's the highest amino in nature. In fish, it's non-essential, but it's the highest in terms of its percentage. As in, if you look at like wheat gluten, it's nearly 20% L-glutamine. So I seen the profile and thought, if I could hydrolyze that, I reckon that would be a good feed stimulant. Anyway, so didn't wasn't interested in hydrolyzing it. I didn't have the wherewithal to hydrolyze it. Then sometime later, I realized that McGee seasoning is actually made out of hydrolyzed wheat gluten. And the first fish I had out of Acton, I put McGee on my nut mix. I put it in a it was the protein nut mix, the peanut protein nut mix. I put a load of McGee all over it, and some orange juice to soak it up. Not a hot soak, just a cold soak. But I put a load of this McGee. And the orange juice, which obviously got the citric and the ascorbic, and that's when I had my first fish on the nut mix. So I thought I will do the hot soak, and I managed to get hold of some HVP, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, acid hydrolyzed vegetable protein, which is about 60% 60% of basically when they acid hydrolyze wheat gluten, they do it with sodium hydroxide, and then they do it with hydrochloric acid, and then they titrate sodium hydroxide onto it, so it ends up with a 40% salt content and 60% hydrolyzed vegetable protein. So I was putting that like a big teaspoon of that in, a big dessert spoon of that in a jug. Some citrus, a good dollop of citric acid, all the nampla over the bait, whack that on and let it and hot soak it, lid on the bucket, and off I'd pop to Acton, or sometimes I'd do it the night before. So the hot soak provides the initial attraction. What I did notice, even in 2018, before it went moody, I was getting bites quicker. My bite time was going down. This is it. Sometimes you're marking up or spamming or generally causing disturbance. If I was going to get a bite, basically the two 18 members I had in July 2018, I had the Ottered, spawned out at 38, and I had the Slope at 44. And they both came around 8-9 o'clock at night when I probably baiting up and messing about till 2. Maybe 1-2 o'clock by the time I'd set up. So anywhere between 6 and 8 hours, I was getting a bite, which is very, very. This is before the stockies went in. At the time, that was exceptional. And the same thing when I had the Randall. I had nothing all summer because it went moody. And then when I had the Randall, I told you I'd cracked off and I reset up. I recast that about 6 o'clock, and I had the Randall at 10-1. So again, nearly 7 hours, bang on, that it was doing a bite. Now that is not coincidence. I say that you after 3 seasons on Acton, you see, that's my 3rd season. You start looking at patterns, and your bites are coming. And then the year after, 2 years after, which was last season, when I had the peach in 45 minutes. Obviously, the stockies are in, so the A team are a bit more keen to eat bait when they want it because they know it's going to go.
Yeah.
But my point is, you've got a bite within 45 minutes. I mean, the start of the season, the bites came overnight. I got them at first light, but I'm still getting a bite on the first night. So it's certainly engineering a bite quicker than it used to.
And these are still fish that we're sort of saying are lone feeders, yeah?
Yeah, without a doubt. Absolutely, without a doubt. The only difference is since Rob put the stockies in 2018, the back end of 2018, there's no bait lying around. So the A team are a lot easier to catch than they were. That said, not this season, but the season before, the slope only came out once. Mm-hmm. All the other A team fish were done anywhere between 3, 4, 5, 6 captures when they only used to do 1 or 2 a year. The slope still didn't come out. It came out once on a third to the last day of the season.
Yeah.
This season, it's only been caught once, and it's just done 50. So even the slope's still not feeding. And my first 2 years, first 3 seasons, but in the first in that period, that the slope got caught 5 times, and I had hit 3 of them on the same base mix.
Mm-hmm.
And that's now the biggest fish in the lake. And it's not because I'm a good angler, because it's not angling. That fish wanted that base mix. Yeah,
it is angling, mate. When you put your knowledge into bait like that, it's definitely angling.
Yeah, no, it's angling. But all right, it's not necessarily. It's not a rig.
No, I get it.
Casting at a shore. It's not the technical side of angling, as in rig mechanics or.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Yes, it's on a good spot. But to catch that fish 3 times on a bait that he's not pre-baited, he's not getting introduced. It's only me using it. So the fish, that is a novel bait to those fish.
Yeah.
And another thing I'd point out, some of the fish I've had 2 and 3 times, and other fish I haven't caught, and that speaks to preferences. On the liver fish meal, I've had repeat captures on certain fish, and some I just I just haven't had. And that is the element of chance to some extent, but it also goes to preferences. This year, this season, from last June, I've had a lot of fish I wanted, a few fish I wanted, and it's on the colour bait, which has no whole fish meal in it. There's no LT in it. The protein source is maize for the colour.
Yeah.
10% Oragel, which is obviously decent protein.
Yeah.
A lot of CPS P90 and some Brocacel, and that's it. And the garlic and turmeric with the hot soak, but they can see it.
And where do you see? You've mentioned Brocacel a few times, so I've always used sort of brewer's yeast. I'm happy with brewer's yeast. I've seen sort of like the new yeasts that come out over the years. It's maybe a bit of a fad, but I mean, you've mentioned it a few times.
Right, I'll tell you about Brocacel.
Yeah, go for it.
Brocacel and MB40 are cell wall yeasts.
Yep.
Do you know much about yeast production?
Limited knowledge. I know little bits, but I'm sure not as much as you're going to educate me.
Brewer's yeast is the yeast from brewing.
Mm-hmm.
It's, as far as I understand it, it is whole cells.
Yeah.
The cells are intact. Yeah. There will be some bursting of the cells through the drying process and everything else, but by and large, it's a whole cell product. Yeasts are very good in that they contain ribonucleotides and this and that. When they make the processed yeast products, there's two ways they do it. There's hydrolyzed and autolyzed. Autolyzed, basically, they add salt to it. The salt causes an osmotic, puts 10% salt in the wet yeast. It causes an osmotic shock. It bursts the yeast cells. Then the proteases in the mitochondria, as far as I'm aware, pre-digest the yeast. So they've got a yeast soup which is partially pre-digested. I think other ways they do hydrolyzed, as in they'll add an enzyme. And then if they fill, so you've got the burst cell walls, and you've got the soup of the inside of the cell. And then what they do is they process them further. The soup they'll make into like Marmite. So that's a yeast extract, which is the innards, the cell contents. And then the cell walls are made of something called mannan oligosaccharides, MOS. And basically, it's a polysaccharide, which is, you know what polysaccharide is, I'm assuming. It's a polymer made of sugar molecules.
Yeah.
Now, the reason they use these and Brocacel is that. So if they filter that off, if they spin it, centrifuge it on an industrial scale, the cell walls will separate from the soup. They'll take the cell wall components off. The rest goes to Marmite or flavor. A lot of yeast extracts are used for flavor because of umami. Because they've got ribonucleotides in and a lot of L-glutamine. The cell wall component they use in cattle feed because bacteria digest the mannan oligosaccharides. It causes what's called flocculation, as far as I'm aware. Basically, the gut bacteria colonize the yeast cell walls and ferment it in the cattle's gut and produce a lot of antibiotics and it helps with immune function and digestion. Mm-hmm. Now, if you put yeast cell walls in a carp bait, like at 3%, basically the carp have quite a rudimentary gut, and they use a lot of their intestinal flora, the gut bacteria, helping the digestion. What it also does is if you put Brocacel in a bait, it turns a bait quick because any bacteria in the air are going to colonize that boiler quicker than normal, and sort of flocculate on it and turn that bait quickly. Also, when you chuck it, basically a lake is a bacterial soup, fungi and it's a microbiological soup. Yeah. So when you put a freezer bait in a lake, if it has Brocacel in it, then the lake bacteria are then going to start hydrolyzing that bait quicker than if it doesn't contain it. Now, the difference, as I see, this is in my mind, and I've absolutely no evidence for this. But I look at it like this: if you've got whole yeast cells in a bait, which is brewer's yeast,
Yep.
the carp's rudimentary digestive system is coping with, say, a shit ton of fish meal if it's a good bait. In my bait, certainly, milk proteins, possibly, maize protein, vegetable proteins, which are not as digestible, and then it's got a yeast cell. It's got to digest the thing, the yeast cell, before it starts getting the benefit of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think a pre-digested, processed yeast product is always going to outperform a whole yeast. If you put it at 3%, you can't say it's for price.
No.
Because it's nothing. And then you also have what's called high nucleic yeasts, which is basically all the nucleic acids in yeasts. Because yeast reproduce quick, they've got a lot of nucleic acids. In high nucleic acid, in high nucleic yeast, what they do is they convert all the bases into 5-inosine monophosphate. Now, if you look at a lot of feed stimulants, there was a study done in turbo where it massively increased feed intake, 5-IMP. So what they do is they manipulate the high nucleic yeast. They take all the bases. There's 4 bases in nucleic acids, and they convert it all to inosine. Now, I speak to lads in bait groups, and some lads have said, I read a paper where they said there's a lot of 5-IMP in fish meals, and there's enough to saturate the carp's receptors that if you add high nuc yeast into a fish meal, it does nothing. You're wasting your money. Now, talking about Damien Turner, he said he had really good success putting it in a winter hook bait. I've never tried it myself, but he said he was putting it in a winter hook bait at quite high levels, and he did well, he reckoned, in winter in hook baits. But it was a bird food, it wasn't a fish meal. Anyway, yeah, and also the bait I was using on cell bait had Feed Stim used to do a probiotic yeast extract liquid, which was the liquid soup side of it, and I was putting a probiotic yeast powder in. CC Moore used to do a probiotic yeast powder, which he stopped doing. Mm-hmm. Which since then I've seen Salmonax powder, and it looks similar. If I was a gambling man, I would gamble on the probiotic yeast powder CC Moore used to sell back in the day, no longer do. I would say it's Salmonax or something similar. It wasn't Brocacell.
Mm.
But my point is, Brocacell and Salmonax, things like that, they act as a probiotic. There's a study where Salmonax basically reduces urea output in carp, which means is the carp is retaining more protein, nitrogen. If a carp retains nitrogen, if it's excreting urea, it's shitting out the protein content of its feed stuff. So if it's shitting out less urea, it's retaining nitrogen. In other words, it's absorbing more protein from the feed, and Salmonax does that. So what's happening is the gut flora is getting enhanced by the Salmonax. It's improving its digestion, so it's absorbing more protein and excreting less urea.
Mm.
So that's what, from a carp bait point of view, I think the net benefits of using Brocacell are: 1, it contains a lot of L-glutamine; 2, it contains ribonucleic acids; and it improves the bacterial hydrolysis. So if we're looking at the time bomb, I used to leave my baits out for 40 hours on Acton before you put the stockies in. So you had the hot soak, external attraction, the fish starts chewing it, hopefully within a decent time frame, you've got the internal pre-digested attraction. If that pre-digested attraction washes out, or a lot of it washes out in 24 hours or 48 hours, you've still got the whole proteins which start getting hydrolyzed by the latex bacteria. The Brocacell will aid in that bacterial hydrolysis because of the mannose oligosaccharides. That's how I look at it. Now, Dino says he said in the podcast he only uses brewers, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
So, Dino's baits catch fish, but I only make them for myself. I don't have to look at commercial constraints. price or anything. If it costs me Brocasel, if I'm using 3%, 30 grams, the difference between Brocasel and Brewers is it's not worth worrying about, is it?
It's negligible, isn't it? Really.
Yeah. So that's how yeast come into it.
Well, that's it for episode 1. I hope you enjoyed that. You're going to want to tune in for episode 2 if you want to learn more about Stephen's theories on how you can target big fish, whether that's big males or big commons, whatever your target fish is. Stephen shares some really interesting ideas in part 2. And you don't need to make your own bait to take advantage of Stephen's theories on different baits for different types of fish. So tune in for that one. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening.